Hello and welcome to the Forum Podcast. I'm your host, LJ Harry. Happy to have you with us. And I'm very happy to have with me my guest today, Sister Valeria Hughes. Sister Hughes, welcome to the Forum Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad you are here. Sister Hughes and her husband, Brother Rick Hughes, whom I met the first time in Oklahoma at youth camp, and they were very kind to me. They are the minds and the hearts behind Kingdom Advance Ministry, which empowers leaders, transforms lives, equips the church to advance God's kingdom through mentorship, resources, and community support. And I also got the chance to reunite with them at a global educator training seminar or workshop summit where we, global educators, Sister Hughes, Brother Hughes, are global educators, go around the world training teachers in Bible colleges how to better teach the students they're teaching so the next generation of apostolic leaders will be equipped, trained, resourced to make a difference around the world. So it's a privilege to be on the podcast with you today, Sister Hughes.
Thank you.
Our conversation is something that maybe our teachers have been doing intuitively, but perhaps didn't realize there was a technique for it. And it is called, it's an interesting word, chunking, which
Yes.
I know you could, obviously a lot of applications to chunking, but you could chunk something a lot of different ways and a lot of different ways. But in this case, it is breaking the contents of what we teach into chunks. So there was a whole lot of the Bible, 66 books, 31,000, I think 102 verses. That's a lot of content. How do we teach all of that? And so Sister Hughes is going to help us to do that. So can you just help us to know exactly what is chunking?
Well, first of all, everything needs to have at least a little bit of scripture to hang on to.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a verse in Isaiah 28:10 talks about, line upon line, here a little, there a little. And I like to think about that verse. And then there's a worn out adage about how do we eat an elephant, and it's one bite at a time. And so chunking would just be putting any content that we teach into digestible bites for the learner. And as the teacher, as the instructor, giving the learner very intentional places that they stop and basically move the information from short-term memory to long-term memory, and giving the learner the opportunity to show the instructor any breakdowns in the content that was taught. And so it's taking the content that we teach, and just like, eating an entire elephant, if you think about the elephant as the lesson, then helping the learner figure out what those bites are and how they're going to hang on and retain the content. So the scientific or the educational term would probably be more, Robert Marzano, an educational guru, called it time processing for the learner.
Okay.
And he also, talks about how to time process and then processing through chunking. And
Okay.
that is a funny word.
It is a
But
great word.
just,
I feel like I'm in middle school.
yeah. But just offering the learner little chunks here and there instead of the whole, the entire elephant, and them trying to figure out, how to get
Right.
that.
Exactly. So I'm thinking especially, like, let's say Romans. Let's say we're
Mhm.
going through a Bible study of the book of Romans, and it is so rich. I mean, chapter 8 alone, from the way it starts, that chapter 7 ends up with, a wretched man that I am. I can't do what I want to do, and I do what I don't want to do. So I'm just miserable. And then chapter 8, but if you're in the spirit, and then it goes to this rich, decadent, almost death by chocolate rich treatise on the grace of God, the Spirit of God, the love of God. That's huge. So clearly, that kind of content has to be broken up into those chunks. What about, let's say, narratives? If you're teaching a Sunday school class to 6-year-olds and you're teaching the story of Jesus walking on the water, how much do we have to break that up if that passage is only, let's say, 4 or 5 verses telling that story versus a treatise on Romans? if that makes sense. Is there some
Mhm.
content that lends itself to needing this technique more than others?
I think storytelling, you can make that you can squeeze that a little longer
All right.
because the narrative form engages the brain, because the brain's looking for novelty. So you could help with the chunking, as good teachers do with, props or, anything like that. But I think there are people can research this for their age group, but there are limits to attention for every band of ages. So, like,
Okay.
say, toddler through kindergarten, first grade through third grade, fourth through sixth, and junior high and high school. And educationally, there are bands that we know as teachers, after 3 minutes, there should be something that helps the learner process. And if it's a narrative, I
Right.
I think that students, they love a good story, and
Yes. Yes.
just the narrative aspect of that is enough, I think, unless the story goes too long for their age band,
Right.
Uh,
I've seen that
so
happen. Like,
yes, that's
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I think the narrative itself, if it's a good storytelling and they have good storytelling techniques, I don't think you should interrupt a good, you shouldn't leave Jonah in the big belly of the big fish to stop and process this information. We need to go ahead and get him out.
Let's get, he wants out. He absolutely wants out.
Yes, yes. So the narrative is interesting. I think the brain processing needs the chunking more in, informational content, where the content is dense and the content
Okay.
is hard to grasp for the learner. That's where we really have to, as the teacher, make sure that the student is successful in retaining the information.
Okay. Very good. So narrative, if the narrative is done well, there's not a need to necessarily break it down into these chunks as but if it's more of a theological type, deep,
Mm-hmm.
dense, then definitely do that. Let's drill down a little bit more on that attention and bands of attention, because I know our teachers, every teacher will struggle with this, whether you're teaching children, youth, or adult. What are the this may be an obvious question, but let's just entertain some of our novice teachers or some of our newer ones. What are the signs that you need to stop and break something down a little bit more? What are whether it's body language or just kind of the feel, the tense in the room? What are some of those signs we should look for to say, okay, I've either gone too long on this one area or I've gone too deep, or heaven forbid, a little bit of both?
Yes, I think that elementary students give good signs.
They don't know how to be, let's say, diplomatic yet.
No, they give signs. They
Yes.
start wiggling. They start pinching each other. They start. they I feel like they give good signs, and depending on, there's a lot of things dependent on that question. How strong is their classroom management? How well have
Oh,
they
sure.
trained that group of students? Because a teacher can train a group of students to sit for longer periods of time and take information.
All right.
But I think the huge challenge with Sunday school teachers is we only have them one time a week.
Right.
And so, whatever you trained them for last week, there's been
Right.
a lot of water under the bridge before they get back to you.
Great
And
point.
so, every week you have to start with your expectations. And, you know, I think if teachers are seeing any anything, movement or whatever, it's time to, stand up, everyone, jump three
Oh, sure.
times and then sit back down really quick. I mean, you could even throw something like that into the middle of a story if you
Sure.
could see that they're starting to get restless. And because again, the brain is seeking novelty, surprise and delight. The brain wants that. And so anything you can do to just all of a sudden, throw a left hook at them,
Right.
and they're like, oh, what's this, and their
Sure.
attention will come back.
Sure. Very good. Well, we'll look we'll look for those signs. But you're so right. Elementary school students are like, hey, yep, I'm done. And adults,
Yeah.
they're a little bit more subtle, but you'll probably see a little bit of this kind of thing as they
Yes.
pull out their phone and they start looking at things online because, yeah, we may have lost them, gone too deep, gone too long, a little bit of both. So
Or they
that
start
super
traveling to
helpful.
the bathroom, or, they're moving around in their seats. Yeah. I
Exactly.
think adults are just larger learners, but
Right.
their learning capacity is the same.
Well, and I would imagine with reels being as quick as they are,
Mm.
and then
Hmm.
scrolling, now that you have the ability to just basically change the channel all the time on your phone. I haven't seen it, but last I read in 2015, our attention span was around 8 seconds, which
Hmm.
is incredibly short. But that's kind of, you watch a reel for 8 seconds and you scroll and whatever. The really good ones you may stay on for 20, but for the most part, you're just going along. So that makes our role as
Yes.
teachers like a
Yes.
little bit more difficult, and we have to be more intentional to make sure we're not just droning on with, and we've lost them. And
Yeah.
those obvious signs we've lost them. I've I've seen those before. In fact, one of my professors at UGST used to say, "Okay, I can see I've lost you. Break up into groups." And so he would break us up into small groups, and all of a sudden we'd awaken and we would interact with the text and that kind of thing. So maybe
Yes.
in an adult session or even youth, that would work very well, and perhaps in children, but certainly in some of those older age groups that could work very well. All right, so let's do a little lab work. It is Thursday afternoon. You're getting ready for class on Sunday, and you're teaching. Let's just choose a topical part of the Bible, so it's a little more difficult, and maybe we break this one into chunks. Let's say we're teaching on the armor of God, Ephesians chapter 6. What is the best way to take a passage like that, that is not narrative, but that is vital to know,
Hmm.
to put on the armor of God, how to put on the armor, what it is, and all that? How do we break that content into chunks, those bite-sized ways to eat that armor of God elephant in such a way to teach the students in a way they will learn and remember?
Every lesson most likely is going to have the traditional formatting, so the hook at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
the use of an object to demonstrate the concept. So if it was armor of God, there's most likely some kind of, that's a great lesson for objects and,
It is. It really is.
things. And I would say, just as an extra piece, using things that students wouldn't associate as like the helmet or as the shield even adds more,
Okay.
brain novelty. And then the explain piece is where the teacher is going to actually teach the lesson. That's the content of the new material. And that is really the place where the chunking has to occur. And so on Thursday, the teacher would actually work to figure out how he or she is going to stop and, pause in that explained section to make sure that the student is retaining, again, these small bite-sized chunks that are really brain friendly. And because I think as they study the lesson, it's important to add those places in and just plan for those pieces. You know,
Okay.
you the armor of God would be fabulous because at the end of every piece, you could have some sort of mastery, because that's really the purpose of chunking. The teacher is trying to, it's almost like you're getting to the assessment piece before the assessment piece. It's the pre-assessment,
Okay. All right.
and
Yeah.
so the retention to see, what is the helmet again, what
Right.
is that for, or there's tons of ways to do it, but that would be a
Sure.
fabulous way to stop at each object and have some kind of something. Cold calls are great. I know we as teachers fall into calling on the same hands that are up all the time,
Oh, yes. Yes. Yes,
and
Erwin.
so cold calls are great. Or if it's, I would do this all through probably adults. And if I had the same adults all week,
Hmm.
they could have talking chips. And once they move their talking chips, they're done. Or
Wait,
with
wait, wait. No,
elementary,
let's go back to that. What are these talking chips?
well, I have taught adults, and if I was teaching the same group of adults every week
Right,
and I was having trouble with two or three being that person and doing all the talking, then I would bring like a little disc of paper, doesn't have to be anything, over the top,
right.
and tell everyone you have three of these. And every time you talk, you have to move one, like off the table or take one away. And if you used all your chips, then you can't
Right.
talk anymore. And that all of a sudden puts the introverts in the room on red alert, like, I'm going to
Oh,
have to say
sure,
something
sure.
because, it's usually the extroverts,
Exactly.
and the brain children that
Right,
are, quick.
right.
If I was teaching elementary students, I would have even popsicle sticks with their names all written on them. And I
Okay.
would be cold calling with popsicle sticks. Stephen, tell me about the shield one more time. What was that? Tell me about, what's on our feet. Emily, tell me that. And so they're not sure who's
Oh,
going to be called next.
is that a random? You just pull it out of your hand and it's the
I,
next name, or
yes,
do
I
you
would keep
choose it
them in a,
intentionally?
like a little cup,
I
just the
love this
popsicle
idea.
sticks.
I love
Yes.
this idea.
Hmm.
Okay, so you randomly just pull it out, and whoever's name is on there, they're the one you call on. And so
Hmm.
everybody knows to pay attention because at any minute they may be called upon.
And a lot of teachers, that's kind of built into everything they do. So the students are used to it.
Sure.
As a chunking process, you could actually call, if you wanted to have them process, like, here, I can't remember how many pieces of the armor are. There could be
Right.
11. I don't know. I,
I've-
you know, I can't remember.
I forgot to see helmet, breastplate, waist, shoes, shield, sword.
Seems like
Six,
there's
maybe
eight.
seven,
I don't know.
maybe
So say there's seven. So say
seven's
at
such a
the
good
end,
number.
yes. So say at the end of the first three that you've taught, stop, pull two names out of the little hat cup, and say, okay, um, Emily and Stephen, I want you to talk about the three and have something to, shout out to us at the end. It could be something as simple as that.
Right.
Or you could just have them stand up, turn and face each other. But you have to do a little training for this,
Okay.
before the lesson. Say, during the lesson today, I'm going to have you stand up and you're going to turn to somebody and nobody's left out. If there's someone that's, you have to pull in a third, and you
Right.
have to train kids and you have to train adults to do this because they're, at first they're clunky, they're
Right.
clunky with their chunking.
Clunky
but,
chunking. That could be our episode title.
but whatever you can do to get students talking about the content and to get them telling you what you told them.
Right.
And that's going to help their brain move that again from short term to long term.
Beautiful. You mentioned something earlier, surprise and delight. Would you go a
Mm.
little deeper into that and how we can use this technique to stimulate that surprise and delight?
I believe, I haven't checked this recently, but I believe it's one of Starbucks. It's either Starbucks or Zappos that has that for, I can't remember. It's one of their core values.
Okay.
And it's something that it's part of their customer service. And as a teacher, I loved it when I heard it and
Yeah, I do
just made
too.
it a part of my core principles of my teaching practices, that every lesson there's going to be something to surprise and delight the learner.
Right.
And just that in itself is powerful enough, if you do it well, that will help move from short term to long term. Because again, the entire premise of breaking content into chunks and this time processing is not how much I can pack into the 30 minutes that I have with the students, but it's how much I can get the students to retain of the content that I'm teaching. Because
Okay.
we as teachers, sometimes we like to just drone on and just teach these magnificent lessons. And the kids walk
Right.
out and their parents say, "What'd you do in Sunday school today?" I don't
Right.
know.
Right.
And to me, that's a travesty
I agree.
of education, because I want students to have a lot of things to say
Yes.
to anyone who asks them.
Yes, exactly. So that surprise and delight, that intrigues me so much. Now, let's go short term to long term. So we've taught in the armor of God on Sunday. The following Sunday, they come back. Do you do any kind of review based on
Hmm. Hmm.
it kind of cementing that long term? What does that
Hmm.
look like?
I believe that every lesson should start with a review, and I believe that you should have a quick review with objects of every lesson that you've taught, maybe in a quarter. And I
Okay.
know that takes a little bit of the time
Sure.
away from the new content, but a skilled teacher can hone in on the most important concepts. And again, you can also do that through chunking. You could get the learners involved in that, stand up, face someone, tell
Mm-hmm.
them what our lesson was about last week. And it also really helps with a lot of times in churches today, we have students who are with dad this weekend, they're with mom next weekend,
Great point.
and they might not have heard the lesson.
Great
And
point.
so, if they can be taught by one of their friends in class quickly,
Right.
then they feel like they're a part and they know what was talked about last week. And if they're hearing this, if they're only at Sunday school 2 months, 2 Sundays out of 4, then
Right.
the teacher's going to have to really work to get their short term into long term, because that makes their job a lot harder. So the review is a huge part of moving information from short term to long term, because with every student, no matter what age, retention is the key to learning. Retention is
Yes.
the key to learning. Retention is the key to learning.
Right.
You have to just keep saying the same thing over and over again, because it takes sometimes, I think the last number I heard when I read an article about this was like, yeah, a brain has to hear something 27 times
Oh my.
before they can learn it. And don't quote me on that scientific fact, but
Right.
the last time I checked, it was major. And a major amount of times. And if you add
Sure.
in screen time now
Right.
and all the brain undevelopment, that's
Right.
happening with screen time, then Sunday school teachers, their jobs are just getting more difficult
Yes.
to get students to understand something that's not played out on a screen.
Exactly. Okay. So speaking of screens and reviews, maybe we can marry the two. When I was teaching, when I was pastoring, I would teach adult Bible study, and I would go through books of the Bible. So when I mentioned Romans, I learned the hard way that Romans 8 cannot be taught in one night, at least not really to do it justice. So we took 2 nights, and that's probably not doing it justice either. But at the end of that, maybe at the end, I think at the end of Romans 1 through 8, I did a Kahoot review, which I love.
Yes,
Kahoot. If
yes.
any of our viewers or listeners are unfamiliar, Kahoot is just a website, kahoot.com, that you can do an online quiz, and the contestants, the students, have on their phone the questions and the answers, and they're answering the question as quickly as possible. So the correct, quickest answer gets the most points. So at the end of however many questions, 10, 15, 20, the winner is the one who had the most points. And it is a blast. What was really cool is when I was teaching, we had, of course, many teachers who were apostolic for many years. And then we had a new family who had come in, maybe had been in church for about 1 or 2 years. But during one of those Kahoot reviews, that new family was giving some of those, I guess, veteran families a little bit of a run. And as a teacher, that blessed me, because that let me know that these theological truths and concepts and who Jesus is and all that the Bible has to say is getting in their heart, and they're learning it, they're remembering it. And so that was a pretty cool and sanctified, proud moment as a teacher, seeing that it
Yeah.
was moving from short term, I learned this one week, to long term. We learned this
Yes.
6 weeks ago, but I still retain it. So that was pretty cool. And I wouldn't, whenever you're doing a Kahoot quiz, every question had 3 possible answers. Of course, true and false only had 2, but the multiple choices one was the correct answer, one could have been the correct answer as far as was close. You'd have to know, and one was just there
Yes.
for fun. It was just for humor. So it was.
Yeah.
So I'm giving them a fighting chance. You pretty much have a 50-50 shot at getting it right, but they were getting it right. So I was really really excited. I love that concept of you have to review it because, as you said, if somebody wasn't there, even if it's family who's faithful, but they were on vacation that week or had to
Mhm.
work that Sunday, then they're lost if you're building one lesson upon another. You keep pulling them along, even if you couldn't teach them the entire lesson. And I love the idea of having the students teach that review, making them accountable for what they learned the previous week.
You
These are
could
some
even assign a
fantastic.
student. You could assign a student next week, you're going to do the review for this, you know,
Yes,
and bring your own objects.
yes,
And you're
yes.
going to take 3 minutes and you're going to tell everyone, and you could do the Kahoot at the beginning.
Sure, sure,
I mean,
absolutely.
there's more than 1,000 ways
Right.
that you could do that every time.
Absolutely. Well, this has been extremely helpful. Is there anything else you would like to share about this particular technique and how we can use it in the local church?
I just think it's important to not get in the middle of a lesson and try to think, oh yeah, I got to figure this out, because you have to be quick. And I think the most
Yes,
important thing that I would like to say is that we as teachers love to pack things into the time, and we think that we've done well if we get to all of the lesson. And
right.
sometimes it's important to figure out the absolute vital piece of that lesson and to teach it well and have students retain it rather than because less is always more
Yes,
with this
yes,
concept. Less is more. And I think if we as teachers could really get that and to make a small amount really a fantastic lesson
yes,
and something that's, memorable to the students, that's better than a long piece that no one is going to ever remember. So
right.
less is more.
I agree. And this is one of my, I wouldn't say pet peeves, but maybe it's one of my pet practices, if you will. I do whether I'm teaching or preaching, I try to stay in one story. So if we're teaching the Bible, if it's the armor of God, it was a little tough because there's no narrative with it, but you could certainly attach narratives, shields in the Bible, that kind of thing. But I have been in services before where somebody was teaching or preaching, and they're going through 10, 12, 14 different Bible stories. And all of a sudden, there's so much content that I'm confused. And and it's and I've got Daniel, who's leading a group of lions across the Nile River who are lapping up water out of Revelation, a crystal sea with 144,000 angels around against us. Where are we? So, for the sake of simplicity and retention, and let's just be honest, job security. If you taught
Yeah.
everything from Genesis to Haggai in one Sunday, you've got two more Sundays, and then you're done with the Bible. You got to find another
Yeah,
job.
exactly.
But I certainly think keeping it simple,
Hmm.
taking that story and going into that story, staying there, and then helping them to understand this is what this story means and this is how we live it out is so vital to them learning.
Yes,
Would you be willing to pray a blessing over our teachers that the Lord would help them to use this tool and technique to better teach His word to His students?
sure. Lord, you see
Thank you,
how
God.
important teaching
Oh,
is
yes, Jesus.
to every student, Lord. You see how important it is to
Help us.
positively and long term impact the minds and the spirits of every student that is taught. And I just pray that these teachers would enter the classroom next time with creativity, and you would give them clarity, and you would give them wisdom, and you would give them great ideas, Lord, for how they can help students process and they can help students move your word into long term memory. Because, Lord, your word is the most important thing that we have in this world. And I just ask you, Lord, to give teachers a revelation of how they can better equip their students in their classrooms, whether it be nursery, whether it be adult, Lord. Just show them new concepts and new ways, and brighten their minds with objects and fantastic ways to engage their students' learning.
Yes.
And I just pray that you give each teacher their strength and the stamina that they need to keep going every Sunday, because
Yes.
they are important. And Lord, help them know that they are vital to the kingdom and training the next generation of soldiers for your army. And we just thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much, Sister Hughes. You've been a blessing. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And absolutely. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, you'd like to meet Brother and Sister Hughes, you can meet them on their website, kingdomadvanceministry.com. And they're involved in so many areas around the world, making a difference. So you can get to meet them and connect with them in that way. Thank you for tuning in to our Forum podcast. Join us next month when we'll hear from another guest who will also help us to train teachers in the local church.